"Ma'am." Cleaning crews enter through the side door. The sentence cut through the marble lobby of City Hall with the cold precision of a knife sliding across glass. Conversations faded almost instantly. A few reporters near the security checkpoint lowered their phones just enough to look over the rims of their screens. Officer Daniel Mercer stood firm at the base of the grand staircase, one hand resting near his belt, the other extended toward the side corridor reserved for maintenance staff. Rainwater dripped steadily from the shoulders of his navy uniform onto the polished stone floor beneath him. In front of him stood a black woman in a charcoal gray coat, her curls pinned low at the back of her neck, a leather folder tucked quietly beneath one arm. She looked nothing like the politicians flooding into City Hall that morning. No security detail, no expensive jewelry, no campaign photographers orbiting around her like satellites. Just a woman standing alone beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers while the smell of wet pavement drifted through the open doors behind her. Naomi Brooks glanced once toward the staircase leading into the council chamber. Her expression barely changed. "I'm here for the infrastructure meeting," she said calmly. Mercer gave a short laugh under his breath, the kind people used when they thought they already understood everything about someone before hearing another word. "Everybody says that," he replied. Around them, camera flashes sparked like distant lightning. City Hall buzzed with tension that morning. The mayor was preparing to announce the largest transportation project in state history, a $4.8 billion redevelopment plan expected to bring investors, press, and federal officials into the city for the next decade. Security had been tightened since sunrise. Metal barricades lined the sidewalks outside. Satellite news trucks clogged the street for nearly 2 blocks. Inside the lobby, aides hurried past carrying binders and coffee trays, while journalists rehearsed introductions under their breath. But despite all the movement, Naomi stood perfectly still. The leather folder remained pressed lightly against her side. Mercer noticed. Her shoes next. Black flats, damp from the rain. Sensible. Unremarkable. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Staff entrance is around back," he said again, slower this time, like he was speaking to someone who didn't belong in the room enough to understand directions the first time. Naomi's gaze shifted toward the enormous city seal embedded in the marble floor between them. Gold reflected softly across the polished surface beneath the chandelier light. "I was invited," she answered. Mercer sighed, already impatient. "Look, ma'am, I don't have time for this today." A pair of young reporters standing nearby exchanged awkward glances, but said nothing. One quietly lifted his phone and angled the camera toward the scene. Naomi noticed, but didn't react. Outside, thunder rolled low across the skyline. The heavy rain beating against the tall windows made the entire lobby feel sealed off from the rest of the city. Mercer stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice. "There are a lot of important people coming through here today." Naomi finally looked directly at him. Her eyes were calm, unreadable, almost tired. "I know," she said softly. For a brief second, something about her composure unsettled him. Not fear, not anger, something steadier than both. But then the elevator doors behind them opened with a sharp metallic ding, and another wave of suited officials spilled into the lobby. Mercer straightened immediately, eager to regain control of the moment before anyone important noticed the delay. "Ma'am," he said firmly, extending his arm toward the side hallway once more, "I need you to move." Naomi Brooks looked at the officer's outstretched arm for a long moment before stepping quietly to the side instead of arguing. The movement was small, controlled, almost graceful, but it changed the energy in the lobby immediately. People always expected resistance, raised voices, embarrassment. Instead, she simply adjusted the sleeve of her rain-damp coat and walked toward the edge of the marble hall while the crowd resumed its nervous motion around her. Officer Mercer watched her carefully, still unconvinced. Something about her calmness bothered him more than anger would have. Most people became defensive when challenged at City Hall, especially on days like this. But the woman carried herself with the strange stillness of someone who did not need to prove anything to anyone. Near the entrance, a maintenance worker struggled with a rolling cart stacked with bottled water and folded signage for the press conference upstairs. One of the wheels caught in the groove between the marble tiles, jerking the cart sideways. Several laminated signs slid loose and scattered across the floor. Suited officials walked around the mess without slowing down. Naomi stopped instantly. Without hesitation, she bent to gather the fallen signs before the corners could crease against the wet floor. "Thank you, ma'am," the older worker whispered, slightly out of breath. Naomi smiled softly as she handed him the stack. "Looks heavier than it should be," she said. The man laughed quietly. "Everything in this building is heavier than it looks." For the first time that morning, warmth touched her expression. Mercer noticed the exchange from across the lobby. To him, it only confirmed what he already believed. Staff recognized staff. He adjusted the radio clipped to his shoulder while scanning the growing crowd near the staircase. The mayor's communications team was setting up cameras beneath the giant city seal mounted above the chamber doors. Bright studio lights washed the upper balcony in pale white glare. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from a catering station near the elevators. Every few seconds, another city official stepped through the revolving doors, shaking rainwater from expensive coats. Naomi moved toward a row of chairs near the wall, quietly taking a seat beside an elderly man wearing a faded military cap. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to fold a paper program for the event. The glossy pages slipped from his fingers twice before Naomi reached over gently. "Here," she said. "The crease is easier if you fold from the middle first." The veteran looked at her with tired eyes and managed a grateful smile. "You here for the announcement too?" Naomi nodded. "Something like that." Before he could respond, a young event coordinator hurried over carrying a clipboard pressed tightly against her chest. Her heels clicked nervously against the marble floor. "Sir, I am sorry, but these seats are reserved for media guests only." The old veteran immediately started to rise. "Oh, right. Sorry." Naomi stood first. "He can have my seat," she said calmly. The coordinator hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, these are credential-only rows." Naomi glanced toward the nearly empty line of reserved chairs stretching across the lobby. "There is room." The coordinator lowered her voice. "Please do not make this difficult." Mercer noticed the exchange instantly and started walking toward them with measured steps. His jaw tightened the closer he got. Around them, several reporters had already begun paying attention again. A phone camera tilted upward. Somewhere near the staircase, a red livestream light blinked on. Outside, rain hammered harder against the massive glass windows of City Hall, while thunder rolled low enough to vibrate faintly through the floor beneath their feet. Officer Daniel Mercer approached with the controlled stride of someone accustomed to people moving aside before he even spoke. The polished marble reflected the overhead chandelier light across the toes of his boots as he stopped beside the row of reserved chairs. Up close, his expression looked sharper now, pulled tight by irritation and the growing awareness that more eyes were beginning to follow the situation. "I already asked you once," he said to Naomi, keeping his voice low but firm. "This area is restricted." The elderly veteran beside her immediately lowered his gaze toward the folded event program in his hands, as though he regretted sitting there at all. Naomi remained standing, calm, still holding the edge of the chair she had just offered away. "He was only trying to sit down," she replied quietly. Mercer glanced toward the old man, then back to her. "And you are creating a disruption during a secured government event." The young coordinator shifted nervously beside them, clutching her clipboard tighter against her chest. Around the lobby, the noise had changed. It was subtle at first. Conversations were quieter now, slower. The sound of camera shutters clicked in irregular bursts from across the room, while several reporters pretended not to stare directly at the unfolding tension. Near the staircase, a local news producer whispered into her headset without taking her eyes off Naomi. Mercer noticed the phones. That only hardened him further. He had spent nearly 15 years working security detail in government buildings. In his mind, hesitation created chaos. Appear uncertain for 1 second, and people pushed boundaries immediately. He had seen protests erupt from smaller misunderstandings than this. Today mattered too much for mistakes. The mayor was upstairs preparing for a nationally televised announcement. Federal transportation officials were expected within minutes. Investors were already inside the chamber. Every hallway in City Hall buzzed with pressure and political nerves. And standing in the middle of it all was a woman Mercer still believed had wandered into a place she did not belong. Naomi adjusted her grip on the leather folder beneath her arm. A faint gold state seal briefly caught the chandelier light near its corner before disappearing again beneath her coat sleeve. Mercer missed it completely. Ma'am, he said again, slower now. If you do not have press credentials or staff clearance, I need you to wait outside the secured area. Naomi studied him for a moment. There was no anger in her face. No embarrassment either. Just a quiet kind of disappointment that somehow unsettled him more than confrontation would have. Do you always speak to people this way? She asked softly. Mercer blinked once, caught off guard by the question. I speak to everyone the same. One reporter near the elevator subtly raised an eyebrow at that. Naomi noticed, but said nothing. The old veteran beside her struggled to stand fully from the chair, leaning heavily on a silver cane. Before Mercer could react, Naomi reached out carefully to steady the man's elbow. The gesture was simple, human, but Mercer interpreted it instantly as refusal to comply. All right, he said, voice tightening. This conversation is over. He motioned toward the side hallway leading away from the main lobby. You need to leave this section now. The rain outside crashed harder against the windows, streaking the glass in silver rivers beneath the gray morning sky. Somewhere upstairs, applause suddenly echoed through the chamber as another official arrived for the event. Naomi glanced briefly toward the grand staircase, then back at Mercer. The meeting is about public transportation funding for low-income neighborhoods, she said calmly. I helped write part of that proposal. Mercer gave a short, disbelieving smile. Sure you did. A few nervous chuckles scattered somewhere behind the cameras. Naomi lowered her eyes for the briefest moment, almost as though she expected the reaction already. Then she inhaled slowly and tightened her fingers around the folder against her side, while the entire lobby seemed to wait for whatever would happen next. The silence after Naomi's words lingered longer than anyone expected. Even the reporters holding phones near the staircase seemed unsure whether to keep recording openly or pretend they were checking messages. Officer Mercer stared at her with the exhausted patience of a man convinced he was dealing with someone difficult on purpose. Ma'am, he said carefully, this is exactly the kind of thing I am talking about. You cannot just walk into a secured government event and claim involvement in state projects. Naomi shifted the leather folder slightly against her side. Raindrops still glistened faintly along the sleeve of her charcoal coat beneath the chandelier light. I did not claim involvement, she answered softly. I said I helped write it. Mercer exhaled sharply through his nose. Nearby, the young coordinator looked ready to disappear entirely. Her eyes darted anxiously between the cameras, the officer, and the growing cluster of city employees slowing their pace to watch. Up above, the giant digital clock mounted near the council chamber doors clicked over another minute. The mayor's announcement was approaching fast. Mercer lowered his voice again. Listen to me. Important officials are arriving any second. I cannot have unverified individuals wandering around restricted sections of City Hall. Naomi glanced toward the rows of empty, reserved seats, then toward the reporters gathering closer with every passing moment. You keep saying important people, she replied. But all I see are people. For a second, Mercer did not answer. The statement hit him strangely, not because it was loud, but because it was not. It carried the quiet weight of someone completely unafraid of being dismissed. That unsettled him more than confrontation ever could. Before he could respond, movement near the front doors drew attention across the lobby. 2 city council members entered beneath a cluster of umbrellas held by aides while photographers surged forward in flashing bursts of white light. The noise swelled instantly. Questions echoed across the marble hall. Security personnel shifted positions. Mercer glanced away toward the entrance, distracted for only a moment. When he looked back, Naomi had bent beside the elderly veteran again. The man's cane had slipped sideways against the smooth floor. She picked it up carefully and returned it to him with both hands, as though it deserved respect too. Thank you, the old man whispered. Naomi smiled gently. My father used one before he passed. Something softened briefly in the veteran's tired face. He nodded once, understanding more than words explained. Mercer stepped forward again, impatience returning fast. All right, that is enough. This time his tone carried harder edges. You need to leave the restricted area immediately. Naomi straightened slowly. The cameras tilted upward almost in unison. A livestream reporter near the staircase quietly murmured into her microphone. Security appears to be escorting a woman out moments before the mayor's transportation announcement. Mercer heard the sentence and immediately regretted how public the scene had become, but pride had already locked him too deep into the confrontation to back away now. Naomi noticed the flashing red live stream light, reflecting faintly in the polished marble beneath their feet. Still, she did not raise her voice. "Officer," she said calmly, "you are making assumptions about me based on how I look." Mercer's jaw tightened. "No, ma'am. I am following protocol. Protocol without judgment becomes prejudice very quickly." The words landed softly, but several people nearby visibly reacted. One reporter slowly lowered his phone, suddenly uncomfortable. Mercer felt heat rise beneath the collar of his uniform. Around them, City Hall seemed suspended in a strange tension between spectacle and silence. Rain hammered the giant windows overlooking the street, while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Then, from the upper staircase, a sharp voice suddenly echoed across the chamber entrance. "Where is Governor Brooks?" The entire lobby froze. The words echoed across the marble lobby with enough force to stop movement in every direction. "Where is Governor Brooks?" A tall man in a dark blue suit stood halfway down the upper staircase, one hand gripping the polished railing, while two anxious aides hovered behind him, holding tablets and folders against their chests. His voice carried the clipped urgency of someone seconds away from disaster. Conversations collapsed instantly into silence. Even the camera shutters stopped clicking for a moment. Officer Mercer turned toward the staircase, confusion flashing across his face. The mayor's chief of staff rarely appeared rattled in public, but now sweat visibly darkened the collar of his white shirt despite the cold rain outside. "Has anyone seen Governor Brooks?" he demanded again, scanning the crowd below. Reporters immediately straightened. Phones lifted higher. The live-stream cameras that had been aimed at Naomi moments earlier suddenly swung toward the staircase. Mercer instinctively stepped away from Naomi, trying to refocus on the larger situation unfolding around him. "Sir," he called upward, "we are securing the lobby now." But the chief of staff barely heard him. His eyes moved rapidly across the crowd until they landed on the woman standing quietly beside the elderly veteran near the reserved seating row. The color drained from his face almost instantly. "Governor Brooks," he breathed. The entire lobby froze in place. Naomi looked up calmly, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Rain slid down the giant windows behind her in silver streaks, while the overhead chandelier light reflected softly across the marble floor at her feet. Mercer stared at her, then back toward the staircase, trying to process what he had just heard. "Governor," he repeated faintly. The chief of staff hurried down the stairs, so quickly one of his aides nearly lost grip on a stack of briefing folders behind him. "Governor Brooks," he said again, breathless now. "We have been trying to locate you for 20 minutes. The mayor is delaying the entire press conference upstairs." Naomi offered a small apologetic smile. "I arrived on time." The sentence landed softly, but several reporters near the front exchanged stunned looks immediately. One camera operator lowered his equipment entirely. Another zoomed straight toward Officer Mercer's face. The realization hit him all at once, hard enough to make his chest tighten beneath the weight of his uniform vest. His eyes dropped instantly to the leather folder beneath Naomi's arm. Now he saw it clearly. The gold-embossed state seal he had ignored before. The official identification badge clipped discreetly inside the fold. The transportation proposal documents stamped with the governor's office insignia. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Naomi did not look triumphant. That somehow made everything worse. She simply stood there beneath the chandelier light with the same calm dignity she had carried since the moment she entered City Hall. Around them, whispers spread across the lobby like wine through dry leaves. "That is Governor Naomi Brooks. Oh my God." He tried to remove her. "Is this live?" The red livestream indicator still blinked steadily from 3 different cameras. Mercer became painfully aware of every eye in the room turning toward him at once. The chief of staff glanced between Naomi and the officer, confusion sharpening his expression. Was there a problem here? Before Mercer could answer, Mayor Richard Hale appeared at the top of the staircase above them. The room straightened almost instinctively. The mayor looked down over the crowded lobby, his expression tense at first until he spotted Naomi near the seating area. Relief flooded his face. "Governor Brooks," he called warmly. Then his eyes shifted toward Mercer, standing rigidly beside her. Silence followed. Heavy, public, impossible to escape. The mayor descended the stairs slowly this time, each polished shoe striking the marble with deliberate echoes, while dozens of cameras captured every second. Mayor Richard Hale reached the bottom of the staircase with the careful composure of a man trying to contain a disaster before it spread any further. The cameras tracked him instantly, red recording lights reflecting across the polished marble floor like tiny warning signals. Around the lobby, nobody seemed willing to breathe too loudly. Naomi Brooks remained standing beside the elderly veteran, one hand still lightly resting against the leather folder beneath her arm. Her posture had not changed since the revelation. Calm, straight, unshaken. Officer Mercer stood a few feet away, shoulders rigid beneath his damp uniform, his face drained of color under the bright chandelier light. The mayor approached Naomi first. "Governor Brooks," he said quietly, offering his hand. "I sincerely apologize for the confusion this morning." Naomi shook his hand politely. "It has been an eventful arrival." A few uneasy laughs flickered through the crowd before disappearing almost immediately. The tension was too thick for comfort. Mayor Hale glanced briefly toward Mercer, then back to Naomi. "We were beginning to worry upstairs." Naomi nodded once. "I understand." The simplicity of her response somehow deepened the silence instead of easing it. Nearby, one of the livestream reporters lowered her microphone slightly and whispered to her cameraman, "She is handling this with unbelievable grace." Mercer heard it. Every word around him suddenly felt louder than it should have. The mayor turned toward the gathered press. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced carefully, "Governor Brooks has been instrumental in shaping the transportation equity initiative we are unveiling today. Her work on statewide infrastructure access has changed millions of lives." Camera shutters erupted again in rapid bursts. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly, uncomfortable with attention that focused too heavily on her instead of the project itself. Through the giant windows behind them, rain continued streaming down the glass in long silver lines beneath the gray morning sky. The storm outside made the lobby feel strangely enclosed, like the entire city had paused to witness the moment unfolding inside City Hall. Then Naomi looked toward the elderly veteran still seated beside her. "Sir," she said gently, "you should have the front row today." The old man blinked in surprise. "Me?" "Yes," she answered softly. "You served the country long before any of us held office." Emotion flickered across his weathered face so quickly he tried to hide it by adjusting the brim of his faded military cap. Several reporters nearby lowered their cameras for a second, visibly moved. Mayor Hale motioned toward the staircase. "Governor, everyone is waiting for you upstairs." Naomi nodded, but before taking a step, she turned slowly toward Officer Mercer. The entire lobby seemed to tighten again instantly. Mercer swallowed hard. His hands remained locked behind his back, though the stiffness in his posture no longer resembled authority. It looked closer to regret. "Governor Brooks," he began quietly, voice rough now, "I owe you an apology." Naomi studied him for a long moment. Not angrily, not triumphantly, just thoughtfully. Rain tapped softly against the windows behind her, while distant thunder rolled low across the city skyline. "Officer," she said at last, "the problem is not that you did not recognize me." Mercer looked down briefly. "It is that you decided my importance before you knew who I was." The sentence landed with devastating softness. No shouting, no humiliation, just truth spoken plainly enough that nobody in the room could escape hearing it. Mercer's jaw tightened as shame crossed his face in full view of every camera surrounding them. Naomi adjusted the sleeve of her rain-damp coat once more, then gently stepped aside to allow the elderly veteran to move ahead toward the staircase first. The old man looked back at her with quiet disbelief before beginning the slow climb upward while the governor followed behind him at an unhurried pace. And as the cameras captured her ascending the marble stairs beneath the glow of the chandeliers, the entire mood inside City Hall had changed. Not because power had entered the room, but because dignity had. The council chamber upstairs glowed beneath rows of warm recessed lights and polished brass fixtures that reflected softly across the dark wood walls. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the back aisles shoulder to shoulder, while camera operators adjusted lenses toward the podium beneath the massive city seal mounted at the front of the room. The low hum of whispered conversation rolled through the chamber like distant static until Governor Naomi Brooks entered behind the elderly veteran she had helped upstairs. Then the room rose almost instantly to its feet. The applause began unevenly at first, surprised more than organized, but within seconds it swelled across the chamber in a wave of sound that seemed to shake tension loose from the walls themselves. Naomi acknowledged the crowd with a small nod before guiding the veteran gently toward the front row. "Right here," she told him quietly. The old man lowered himself carefully into the reserved seat, still looking stunned by the attention surrounding him. Naomi took the chair beside him instead of the governor's designated seat near the podium. That choice did not go unnoticed. Mayor Richard Hale stepped to the microphone moments later, clearing his throat while aides rushed to adjust schedules already thrown off by the morning's chaos. "Thank you all for your patience," he began, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Today is about rebuilding forgotten neighborhoods and restoring transportation access to communities that have been overlooked for decades." Naomi listened silently beside the veteran, hands folded loosely over the leather folder resting in her lap. The chamber lights reflected softly against the gold seal embossed across its surface. Downstairs, Officer Mercer remained near the lobby staircase watching the event unfold on a mounted television screen above the security desk. The camera feed showed Naomi seated quietly beside the veteran while city leaders filled the stage around her. Mercer stared at the image without blinking. Around him, other officers avoided eye contact. One younger deputy shifted awkwardly before speaking carefully. "You did not know who she was." Mercer's jaw tightened slightly. "That is the problem." The deputy fell silent immediately. Upstairs, Mayor Hale continued outlining the transportation initiative while giant digital renderings of bus routes and rail expansions flashed across projector screens behind him. But the mood inside the chamber had changed from political excitement into something more reflective. Reporters who normally hunted for controversy now kept glancing toward Naomi instead, toward the woman who had entered City Hall alone in the rain, carrying her own folder, while nearly everyone failed to recognize her value until someone announced her title out loud. Finally, Mayor Hale stepped away from the podium and turned toward Naomi. "Governor Brooks," he said warmly, "none of this would exist without your leadership. Would you join us up here?" Applause rose again through the chamber. Naomi hesitated briefly before standing. The veteran beside her looked up with quiet admiration in his tired eyes. "You belong up there," he whispered. Naomi smiled gently. "So do you." She walked toward the stage at an unhurried pace while cameras tracked every step. The soft click of dress shoes against polished wood echoed through the chamber beneath the fading applause. When she reached the podium, the room gradually settled into silence again. Naomi looked out across the crowd for several long seconds before speaking. "This morning," she began softly, "I was reminded of something important." The chamber grew still enough to hear rain tapping faintly against the tall windows overlooking the city skyline. Too often, people decide who deserves dignity before they ever learn someone's name. Several reporters lowered their eyes. Near the back wall, one camera operator slowly exhaled through his nose. Naomi rested her fingertips lightly against the podium edge. The neighborhoods this project serves know that feeling very well. They know what it means to be overlooked until somebody powerful finally notices them. Her voice never rose. It did not need to. The truth inside it carried further than anger ever could. And somewhere downstairs beneath the glow of security monitors and marble chandeliers, Officer Daniel Mercer stood alone listening to every word. The chamber remained silent for nearly 2 full seconds after Governor Naomi Brooks finished speaking. Not the tense silence from earlier in the lobby. This one felt heavier, reflective, like an entire room had been forced to look directly at something uncomfortable all at once. Then applause slowly began near the front row where the elderly veteran sat gripping his folded program against his chest. Others joined in quietly after him until the sound spread across the chamber in warm rolling waves beneath the glow of the recessed lights. Naomi stepped away from the podium with the same calm humility she had carried all morning. She did not linger for praise. She simply returned to her seat beside the veteran while Mayor Richard Hale resumed the presentation. But even as transportation maps filled the projector screens again, the energy inside City Hall had shifted permanently. Downstairs, Officer Daniel Mercer stood alone near the security station long after the other officers had returned to their posts. The mounted television above the desk replayed clips from the governor's speech, while headlines already crawled across local news banners at the bottom of the screen. Governor speaks on dignity after City Hall incident. Security stopped governor before major event. Mercer stared at the words without moving. His reflection looked pale in the dark monitor glass beneath the television. For the first time in years, the certainty he carried into every room felt cracked. He replayed the morning again and again in his mind. The wet shoes, the plain coat, the way Naomi had quietly helped the maintenance worker gather fallen signs while everyone else walked past. The way she offered her seat to the veteran without knowing cameras were recording. None of it matched the assumptions he made within seconds of seeing her. A younger officer approached carefully. "Captain wants statements from everyone involved." Mercer nodded once. "I know." The deputy hesitated. "For what it is worth, sir, she did not try to embarrass you." Mercer looked back toward the television screen, where Naomi now sat beside city officials discussing infrastructure funding. That is exactly why this feels worse. Upstairs, the press conference finally ended nearly an hour later. Staff members gathered folders and disconnected cables, while reporters rushed to file stories before the noon cycle. Rain still tapped softly against the chamber windows, though the storm outside had weakened into a cold, gray drizzle. Naomi remained behind longer than expected, speaking quietly with transportation advocates and shaking hands with local residents invited to the event. She treated every person exactly the same. Interns, janitors, reporters, veterans, council members. Nobody received more warmth because of status. Nobody received less. Mayor Hale eventually approached her near the front row. "Governor," he said quietly, "Public Relations is asking if you would like an official statement released regarding this morning." Naomi glanced toward the chamber doors for a moment before answering. "No," the mayor looked surprised. "No." She shook her head gently. "I do not want a man destroyed for revealing a problem bigger than himself." Hale exhaled slowly. "You are more gracious than most people would be." Naomi gave a faint smile. "Grace only matters when it is difficult." As she gathered her folder to leave, the elderly veteran touched her sleeve lightly. "Governor Brooks?" Naomi turned back toward him. "Yes, sir." The old man's eyes glistened beneath the brim of his faded cap. "Thank you for seeing me this morning." Naomi's expression softened immediately. People should never have to earn being seen. The veteran nodded slowly as though the words settled somewhere deep inside him. Outside the chamber doors, Officer Mercer stood waiting in the hallway beneath the muted gold light of the corridor sconces. His hat rested quietly in his hands now instead of on his head. When Naomi stepped into the hallway and noticed him standing there alone, she paused. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the distant sound of rain drifting through the tall windows at the end of the corridor filled the silence between them. Officer Daniel Mercer stood motionless beneath the corridor lights as Governor Naomi Brooks approached. The polished marble hallway that had buzzed with reporters and staff an hour earlier was nearly empty now. Only the distant squeak of maintenance carts and the soft hum of elevator motors echoed faintly through City Hall. Rain continued sliding down the tall windows overlooking downtown, turning the gray skyline beyond the glass into blurred shadows and silver light. Mercer removed the radio clipped to his shoulder and held it quietly at his side beside his cap. For the first time all morning, he looked less like an officer controlling a building and more like a man carrying the weight of a mistake he could no longer explain away. Naomi stopped a few feet in front of him. Neither spoke immediately. The silence between them felt strangely calm now, stripped of the tension that had filled the lobby earlier. Mercer finally cleared his throat. "Governor Brooks," he said quietly, "I have replayed this morning in my head at least 100 times already." Naomi listened without interrupting. "I told myself I was following procedure," he continued. "But the truth is, I made assumptions before I ever gave you the chance to speak." His eyes lowered briefly toward the polished floor. "And I think deep down, I knew I was doing it." Rain tapped softly against the windows beside them. Naomi adjusted the folder beneath her arm, the gold state seal catching faint light from the corridor sconces. "Most people never admit that part out loud," she said gently. Mercer gave a hollow laugh under his breath. "Maybe because admitting it means realizing the problem is bigger than one bad moment." Naomi nodded once. It usually is. Down the hallway, a janitor pushed a cart slowly past the chamber doors, careful not to interrupt the conversation. Mercer watched the worker for a second before speaking again. When I saw you this morning, I decided who belonged in City Hall before I knew anything about you. Naomi's expression remained calm. And what did you decide? Mercer swallowed hard. That someone dressed simply could not possibly be the person everyone important was waiting for. Naomi looked toward the rain streaking the windows. My father used to drive a city bus, she said softly. People ignored him every day until snowstorms came and they needed him to get to work. Mercer listened carefully. He told me something when I was a little girl. He said, the world notices titles before character, but character is what carries people when the titles disappear. The hallway fell quiet again. Somewhere below them, thunder rolled faintly across the city. Mercer rubbed a tired hand across his jaw. I do not expect forgiveness. Naomi looked back at him fully now. Good, she answered gently. Because this is not about forgiveness. Mercer frowned slightly, surprised. Then what is it about? Naomi's voice stayed soft enough that he had to focus carefully to hear every word. It is about what happens the next time someone walks into a room and does not look powerful enough for people to treat them with dignity. The sentence settled heavily between them. Mercer looked down again, this time not from shame alone, but from understanding beginning to form beneath it. Naomi stepped past him then, moving slowly toward the staircase leading back to the main lobby. Mercer turned instinctively. Governor Brooks? She paused near the top of the stairs. Yes. Mercer held his cap against his chest. Thank you for not destroying me in front of those cameras. Naomi studied him quietly for a moment before answering. Public humiliation rarely changes hearts. Reflection does. Then she continued down the staircase alone. In the lobby below, workers were already removing camera cables and folding reserved signs while the storm outside softened into mist across the city streets. Naomi crossed the marble floor at an unhurried pace, stopping only once to help the maintenance worker from earlier lift a heavy box back onto his cart after it slipped sideways near the front doors. The man smiled gratefully. Naomi smiled back, then stepped out into the cold afternoon rain without security, without applause, and without asking anyone to recognize her at all. Behind the tall glass windows of City Hall, Officer Daniel Mercer remained standing silently. At the top of the staircase, watching the woman he once tried to remove disappear into the gray streets below, and for the first time in a very long while, he understood that dignity was never supposed to depend on who people